The first thing my mother said when I walked into the family reunion was not hello. It was, well, look who finally remembered we exist. People laughed, not because it was funny, but because laughing was easier than asking questions. My name is Evan. I'm 32 years old, and that afternoon, I realized my parents had been preparing this moment long before I arrived. We were gathered in my aunt's backyard. Long tables, plastic chairs, food laid out like nothing was wrong. I had driven 3 hours after work, still wearing my office clothes, thinking this was just another obligatory family appearance. I was wrong. My father picked up the story where my mother left off. He's been busy, he said, shaking his head slowly, building his own life. Some people forget their parents don't stop aging just because the kids move on. Someone murmured, "That's rough." Another relative glanced at me. "You don't visit much anymore." Before I could answer, my mother stepped in. "He doesn't call either," she said. "Weeks go by, sometimes months. We just stopped expecting anything." She said it calmly, practiced, like she'd said it many times before. I stood there holding a paper plate, suddenly very aware that everyone was now looking at me, not as a son, but as a problem that had finally shown up in person. My father sighed. "We raised him to be independent. Guess it worked too well." More laughter. This time, it felt sharper. I opened my mouth, then closed it. Because correcting them would mean explaining things they had begged me never to explain. Don't tell people we need help. Don't talk about money. Don't make us look weak. Those rules had been drilled into me for years. So I stayed quiet while they kept talking. They talked about managing alone, about figuring things out, about learning not to rely on anyone. Not once did they mention how those things actually happened. My aunt leaned in, genuinely concerned. "That must be a lot to handle on your own." My mother nodded slowly. "It is. But you do what you have to do when your child walks away." That sentence landed hard. Walked away. I looked around and realized no one here knew the difference between walking away and staying silent, between abandonment and invisibility. To them, I was the irresponsible child who disappeared, not the one who paid the bills, not the one who handled the paperwork, not the one who kept everything from falling apart quietly, month after month. Just the one who wasn't there. Someone finally asked me directly, "So why haven't you been around much?" The yard went quiet. This was the moment where I could correct the story, or let it settle into something permanent. I chose the answer I'd been trained to give. "I didn't want to make things harder," I said. My father smiled, relieved. "See? Always so sensitive." The conversation moved on, but something inside me didn't, because in that moment I understood exactly what was happening. My silence wasn't protecting my parents anymore. It was protecting a lie, and by the time the reunion ended, everyone would leave believing the same thing, that I was the child who abandoned them, not knowing that the only reason they still looked stable at all was because I had been holding everything together from a distance and saying nothing. What my parents didn't understand was that silence has momentum. Once you let people believe a version of events, that version starts filling in its own details. By the time the reunion moved from small talk to dessert, the story about me had grown legs. I wasn't just busy, I was distant, cold, ungrateful. I watched it happen in real time. Someone said, "It must be hard, handling everything yourselves at your age." My mother nodded. "You adapt. You learn not to expect help." That word, help, hit differently when you know exactly how much of it you've been giving. Because the truth was never dramatic. It wasn't one big heroic gesture. It was dozens of small, unremarkable decisions stacked on top of each other until they became my normal. I paid the electric bill the first time because it was late, and my father sounded embarrassed on the phone. "I'll handle it next month," he said. "Just spot us this once." Next month came and went. So did the one after that. Eventually, I stopped asking. I set it to autopay under my account and told myself it was temporary. Temporary became 2 years. When my mother's insurance lapsed, she called me in tears from a pharmacy parking lot, saying they wouldn't release her medication. I left work early, spent 40 minutes on hold, faxed documents, argued with a representative who kept calling me sir, and speaking slowly like confusion was contagious. When it was resolved, my mother said, "Please don't tell your aunt about this. She worries too much." I didn't. When my father needed a follow-up appointment after his surgery, I coordinated it because he didn't want to deal with the online portal. When transportation became an issue, I rearranged my schedule. When forms needed signatures, I emailed them, printed them, mailed them, tracked them. Every problem had the same ending: "Thank you," followed by, "Let's keep this between us." So I did. I stayed invisible on purpose. I answered calls quietly. I sent money without notes. I learned their account numbers by heart so I wouldn't have to ask questions. I became very good at fixing things without leaving fingerprints. Standing there at the reunion, watching my parents describe themselves as abandoned, I realized something uncomfortable. They weren't lying because they thought I'd exposed them. They were lying because they thought I never would. Across the table, my cousin leaned toward my father. "Didn't you have some trouble with your utilities last year?" My father hesitated. "Just a beat too long." "That was sorted," he said. "We figured it out." I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. A habit reflex made me glance down. "Payment processed successfully. Electricity, same date as always." I didn't check the amount. I never did anymore. My aunt frowned slightly. I remember Evan calling me about a medical form around that time. My mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, he likes to worry." Worry. That was the word she always used when she didn't want to admit dependence. I could feel the shift happening around me. Not loud, not confrontational, just subtle. People were replaying conversations in their heads, recalling phone calls, remembering moments that hadn't made sense at the time. I still didn't interrupt, because this was the part they couldn't undo with emotion. This was logistics, timelines, repetition. Someone asked me casually, "So you really haven't been helping out much?" I looked at my parents before answering. They were watching me now, carefully. "No," I said. "I've been handling things." My mother's smile tightened. "You mean offering advice?" I shook my head. "No, I mean handling them." Silence spread, slow and uncomfortable. My father cleared his throat. "We didn't ask him to." That was true, and it wasn't. "You asked me not to talk about it," I said. "That's different." No one laughed this time. I didn't pull out receipts. I didn't scroll through bank apps or open emails. I didn't need to. The truth didn't need to be proven yet. It just needed to be said out loud once. "I stayed quiet because you wanted to look independent," I continued. "I didn't think it would turn into me being painted as the problem." My mother opened her mouth, then stopped. For the first time that afternoon, she didn't know which version of the story would hold. Around us, people avoided eye contact. Not with me, with my parents. That was when I understood the real risk of silence. It doesn't just hide the truth. It lets other people decide what replaces it. And now that the replacement was starting to crack, there was no going back to how it had been. This wasn't a misunderstanding anymore. It was a reckoning waiting for someone to blink. No one raised their voice. That was the strangest part. At family gatherings, confrontations usually come with noise, interruptions, defensiveness, someone storming off. This one didn't. It came with pauses, with people looking down at their plates a second longer than necessary, with questions that sounded casual but weren't. My uncle broke the quiet first. "So," he said slowly, "who's been handling the bills these past few years?" My mother answered too quickly. "We have." He nodded, then added, "Because I remember Evan calling me about the internet account last winter." He had the account number memorized. Every head turned slightly, not dramatically, just enough. My father smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "He worries. Always has." I didn't correct him. I didn't need to. Another relative leaned back in her chair. And the nurse who comes by twice a week? Didn't you say Evan arranged that? My mother's fingers tightened around her fork. That was temporary. How temporary? Someone asked. She hesitated, counted in her head. A few months. It's been almost a year, my cousin said. Not accusing, just precise. That was when the story started to fall apart. Not all at once, but in pieces small enough that no one could accuse me of causing a scene. People began doing quiet math. Not financial math, timeline math. The kind where you line up memories and realize they don't agree with what you've been told. My aunt looked at me directly. Have you really not been helping them? I answered plainly, I have. My mother let out a small, disbelieving laugh. He means emotionally. No, I said. I mean practically. The word landed differently. Utilities, I continued, keeping my voice steady. Insurance paperwork, appointments, transfers. My father cut in. We didn't ask for that. I nodded. You asked me not to talk about it. Silence. That sentence changed the temperature, because asking someone to stay quiet isn't the same as not needing help. It implies awareness, intent, control. My mother finally turned to me, eyes sharp. So what? You're saying we're incapable? I shook my head. I'm saying you didn't want to be seen as capable only because I was invisible. No one spoke for a long moment. Then my uncle said something simple. That's not abandonment. My mother opened her mouth to respond and closed it again, because there was no argument that didn't make things worse. If she denied it, there were too many witnesses now. Too many half-remembered calls. Too many moments people were suddenly reinterpreting. If she admitted it, the story she'd been telling collapsed completely. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't come with screenshots or statements or bank logs queued up. I hadn't come to expose anyone. All I'd done was stop editing myself, and that was enough. Someone asked quietly, "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I answered honestly, "Because they asked me not to. Because I thought protecting their image mattered more than protecting mine." My father looked at the table. My mother stared past me, jaw tight. The reunion didn't explode. It thinned. Conversations broke into smaller groups. People drifted. The laughter didn't return. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was discomfort. The kind that comes when you realize you've been sympathizing with the wrong version of a story. A few relatives came over later, not to interrogate me, just to say things like, "We didn't know," and "I'm sorry," and that must have been a lot to carry alone. My parents didn't say anything. They didn't apologize. They didn't argue. They just grew quieter as the afternoon went on, like people realizing the room they're in no longer belongs to them. As I left, my mother finally spoke. "You didn't have to do this here." I looked at her. I didn't. And that was the truth. I hadn't exposed them. I'd just stopped covering. What I didn't know yet was that this wasn't the end of it. It was only the moment everyone else caught up to what I'd been living with for years. Once people see the pattern, they don't unsee it. And once the family image cracks, it doesn't shatter loudly. It fractures, quietly, permanently, until everyone knows exactly where the weight has really been carried. The reunion didn't end with a fight. That's what my parents told themselves later, I'm sure. No yelling, no accusations. No one stormed out. In their minds, that probably meant they were still in control. But control doesn't disappear loudly. It slips. I noticed it first in the way people stopped asking them questions. My aunt came over while my mother was distracted, lowering her voice. "How long have you been handling things for them?" I didn't exaggerate. I didn't soften it either. "A few years." Her face tightened. Not with anger, but with recognition. That explains a lot. Another relative asked for my number just in case. Someone else mentioned they hadn't realized how much responsibility I'd taken on. No one said it directly, but the shift was obvious. The sympathy had moved. My parents felt it too. My father stopped telling stories. He sat quietly, nodding when spoken to, like someone waiting for the right moment to regain footing that never came. My mother kept trying to steer conversations back to safe ground. Weather, food, old memories. But people didn't follow the way they had before. Once trust starts cracking, small talk doesn't hold it together. At one point, my mother pulled me aside near the driveway. "You didn't have to imply things like that," she said quietly. "People don't need to know our private matters." I looked at her. I didn't imply anything. I answered questions. Her eyes hardened. "You know how it looks." That sentence landed harder than she intended. Because for years, how it looked had mattered more than how it actually was. "I stayed quiet for that exact reason," I said. "You're the one who told the story today." She didn't respond. She couldn't. Not without contradicting herself. That night, after I got home, my phone started buzzing. Not from my parents. From relatives. Short messages at first. "Are you okay? We didn't realize you were doing all that. If you ever need support, let us know." I stared at the screen longer than I should have. It felt strange being seen. Not praised, not rescued, just acknowledged. Like someone finally noticing the weight I'd been carrying and admitting it existed. My parents didn't call that night. They didn't text either. But the next morning, my father sent a message that said only this: "We need to talk, privately." I knew what that meant. Not an apology, not accountability. Damage control. They wanted the silence back. The version where I handled things quietly and they managed the narrative. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened my banking app, scrolled through the familiar list of transactions, the recurring payments, the reminders I'd set years ago because it was easier than waiting for a crisis. I stared at one in particular, the autopay I could cancel with a single tap. For years, I'd told myself I was helping, that this was temporary, that it was the right thing to do. But standing there in my quiet apartment, phone in hand, I finally understood something I'd avoided for too long. Helping someone while they erase you isn't generosity, it's permission. I didn't cancel anything yet, but for the first time, I considered what would happen if I stopped. And that thought, more than any argument or confrontation, was what truly scared them. Because once silence stops working, people who rely on it have nothing left to hide behind. My mother called 3 days later, not to ask how I was, not to talk about what happened at the reunion. She called because something had gone wrong. "Did you change something?" she asked the moment I picked up. No hello, no small talk. Just accusation, thinly disguised as concern. "Change what?" I asked. "The electricity," she said. "We got a notice. They're saying the payment didn't go through." I leaned back against my kitchen counter and closed my eyes for a second. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I finally understood how fragile their sense of independence really was. "I didn't change anything," I said calmly. There was a pause. Papers shuffled on her end. I could picture her standing in the kitchen, holding a letter she didn't know how to fix. "Well, something's wrong," she said. "Can you call them? You know how to talk to those people." That sentence said everything. Not "can you help?" Not "can we talk about this?" Just the assumption that I would step back into place. "I'm not calling," I said. Her voice sharpened instantly. "Why not?" "Because I've been handling things quietly for years," I replied. "And you used that silence to tell everyone I abandoned you." "That's not what we said," she snapped. "It is," I said. "It's what people heard." My father's voice came through in the background, muffled, tense. "Tell him we just need this one thing sorted out." I felt something in my chest loosen. Not anger, relief. "No," I said again. "You need to handle it." My mother laughed, but it wasn't real. "You're being dramatic. This isn't the time for some kind of lesson." I looked at the calendar on my fridge. The reminders I'd set for their life. The ones I hadn't deleted yet. "This is exactly the time," I said. Silence. Then her tone shifted. Softer. Careful. "We didn't mean to make you look bad," she said. "People misunderstood." I didn't respond. "Evan," she continued, "you know how family is. We don't need everyone in our business." "You put it in their business," I said. I just stopped fixing it afterward. That was when her frustration cracked into fear. "Do you know what will happen if this doesn't get paid?" she asked. "Late fees, shutoffs. It affects records." "I know," I said. "I've been protecting you from that for years." Another pause, longer this time. My father spoke up, louder now. "So what? You're just going to let us fail?" I chose my words carefully. "I'm going to let you be responsible." The line went quiet. They weren't angry anymore. They were recalculating, running through scenarios, realizing how many things they didn't actually control. "You're doing this because of the reunion," my mother said finally. "No," I said. "I'm doing this because the reunion showed me something." "What?" she asked. "That you were comfortable letting everyone believe I was the problem, as long as the bills stayed paid." She didn't deny it, because she couldn't. When the call ended, I sat there for a long time, phone in my hand, staring at the wall. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't accused, I hadn't threatened. I'd just stepped out of the role they'd quietly assigned me, and for the first time, they felt the weight of everything I'd been carrying, because it was no longer on my shoulders. They would call again. I knew that. But the next call wouldn't be about electricity. It would be about consequences they'd never planned to face on their own. They didn't call again that week. That was how I knew something had shifted. For years, silence from them meant things were fine, because I was fixing them quietly in the background. Missed payments, doctor appointments, insurance renewals, forms they didn't understand and didn't want to learn. This silence was different. This silence meant the systems I had been buffering them from were starting to answer back. It started with my aunt. She texted me late one night. No greeting, just a screenshot. It was a group message from the family chat. The one I had muted years ago because it was mostly holiday photos and passive-aggressive comments. My mother had written, "Does anyone know how to deal with utility companies cutting power so quickly?" That was it. No context. No explanation. Just confusion. Broadcast to the same relatives she had told, weeks earlier, that I was irresponsible and distant. My aunt followed the screenshot with a single line. "What's going on?" I stared at my phone for a long moment before answering. Then I told the truth. Not emotionally, not dramatically, just fact by fact. I explained that I had been paying their electricity, water, and phone bills for years. That I'd set everything on autopay under my own accounts because they kept forgetting deadlines. That I stopped after the reunion, after realizing they were comfortable letting everyone think I'd abandoned them. My aunt didn't reply right away. Neither did anyone else. But the next morning, the family chat was different. Questions started appearing, careful ones at first. "Wait, you were paying the bills? For how long? Why didn't we know?" Then bolder ones. "So what exactly have they been handling? Is this why there were issues last winter?" My parents didn't respond. They couldn't, because every answer would contradict the version of the story they'd been telling. By afternoon, my cousin called me. He sounded unsettled. "Evan," he said, "I didn't know. None of us did." "I wasn't trying to hide it," I said. "I just didn't think it was something to announce." "Why protect them?" he asked. "I thought about that longer than I expected. Because I thought it was temporary," I said. "I thought eventually they'd stand on their own, and I didn't want to embarrass them while they figured it out." He exhaled slowly. "They embarrassed you instead." That night, my phone rang again. My mother. This time, her voice didn't start with anger or accusation. It started with panic. "People are calling," she said. "They're asking questions." "I know," I replied. "Why would you tell them?" she demanded, but the edge was gone, replaced by fear. "I didn't tell them," I said. "You did. When you needed help." She inhaled sharply. "You let this get out of control." "No," I said. "I stopped controlling it." My father took the phone. His voice was strained. "You've made us look incompetent." I didn't raise my voice. "You made yourselves dependent. I just stopped hiding it." There was nothing they could say to that, because the truth had done something I never could. It had spread on its own. Relatives began comparing notes, remembering moments that hadn't made sense before. The time my parents claimed a billing error I'd quietly fixed. The winter my mother borrowed money for unexpected expenses that now had a name. I didn't need to explain anymore. The narrative corrected itself. By the end of the week, my parents weren't calling to demand help. They were calling to ask how to fix things themselves. How do we set up autopay? Who do we talk to about payment plans? Can you just walk us through it? For the first time, I heard something in their voices I'd never heard before. Uncertainty. Not because they were being punished, but because they were finally standing where I'd been standing all along. Alone, responsible, accountable. And for once, I didn't rush in to save them. I told them the names of departments, the numbers to call, the steps to follow. Then I said goodbye, because help doesn't always mean taking over. Sometimes it means letting people face the consequences they kept handing to you. And the hardest part? Watching them realize that the irresponsible child they'd described to everyone was the only reason they hadn't fallen apart sooner. That realization stayed with them, because this time, there was no one left to quietly carry it for them. The family reunion never came up again. Not officially. No one apologized in a dramatic way. No group message was sent clearing my name. No announcement was made correcting the story my parents had told so confidently that afternoon. It didn't need to be. Because after the truth surfaced, everything shifted in small, unmistakable ways. Relatives stopped asking me why I didn't visit more often. They started asking my parents how they were managing. When holidays came around, invitations were worded differently, more careful, less accusatory. People checked in with me directly instead of assuming I was the problem that needed fixing. My parents noticed. They became quieter in group settings, less eager to tell stories, less willing to play the role of the misunderstood elders abandoned by an ungrateful child, because that version of events no longer worked. The systems I'd once handled quietly for them, utilities, payments, appointments, didn't suddenly become easier just because I stepped away. They became visible, tangible, inconvenient. Bills arrived on time, consequences followed on schedule, and for the first time, none of it landed on me. A few months later, my father tried one last conversation, not a call, an email. It was carefully written, neutral, almost professional. He said they were adjusting, that things were harder than expected, that they never realized how much I'd been doing. There was no apology in the words themselves, just an acknowledgement shaped like one. I read it once, then again, and I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because the silence finally belonged to me. I had spent years absorbing responsibility so quietly that people mistook my absence for neglect instead of exhaustion. I learned, too late but clearly, that protecting a family's image at the cost of your own truth doesn't make you loyal. It makes you invisible. Walking away didn't make me heartless. Stopping didn't make me cruel. It made the story honest. My parents still have each other. They still have relatives. They still have options. What they don't have anymore is someone quietly fixing everything while they rewrite reality in public. And that's the ending I've made peace with. Because family isn't defined by who speaks the loudest at reunions. It's defined by who shows up consistently and who only notices you when you stop. They called me irresponsible because I stopped paying their bills. But the truth settled in slowly, unmistakably. I wasn't the child who abandoned them. I was the one who finally stopped carrying what was never mine to hold.